2002, the Jim Henson Company released It's a Very Muppet Christmas Movie. During the middle of the film, when Kermit is being shown a world where he did not exist, we see the world is a dark, awful place of drugs, gangs, and crime, and all of the other Muppets are living horrible lives close to death and in poverty. But at one point, we see the New York City skyline, with all its familiar buildings, but with two strange, familiar shapes looming dark on the horizon. Those being the two buildings of the World Trade Center, still standing 1 year after they should have been destroyed. Let's explore how Kermit the Frog, the iconic Muppet, might be connected to this historic tragedy that cost us 1,700 American lives and plunged us into a 15-year-long, $2 trillion global conflict, resulting in the destruction of several nations, the destabilization of the Middle East, and resulting in the deaths of over 4.7 million people across the globe. Most importantly, we need to know how Kermit is connected to all of it. Hi, welcome back, everyone. Took a little bit of a leave of absence for the year of 2023. Get back on the horse, you know. You see, this all started with a singular Reddit post, which essentially was what you saw at the beginning there. 2002, It's a Very Muppet Christmas Movie. Someone noticed in the background that there were the World Trade Center still standing in a movie from 2002. When I first started looking into it, I kind of thought that's where it would end. That it would just be some editor's mistake in a kid's movie, in a kid's Christmas movie for the Muppets. One of the longest running shows of all time. Just an honest-to-God mistake. But that's not what I found. You see, when I started researching this and started looking into it, some of the other things about the Muppets, about Kermit the Frog, about the Jim Henson Company as a whole, it's got scary. I found more credible evidence for this theory than for any other 9/11 harebrained conspiracy theory. Jet fuel can't melt steel beams, second to none. Second to Kermit the Frog inadvertently caused 9/11. And now when I say I found a lot of evidence, I found a lot of very convincing things from all across the history of the Jim Henson Company, the Muppets, Kermit the Frog, even the real life events that took place that led up to 9/11. This video is going to briefly cover a lot of very complicated topics, a lot of geopolitical things, and a lot of overarching world history that goes back hundreds of years, just a touch. There is no possible way in this video I could accurately cover all of the events that I'm going to talk about. I would be here until next year. That being 2025, not even 2024. That could have been a very easy shoe-in New Year's Eve joke because I'm recording this like on the December 30th. But no, I won't stoop that low. I won't make that joke. I just want to talk about what I found, and I hope you'll listen. Now let's begin this entire story. Kermit the Frog, 9/11 with Sesame Street. Damn, there's a lot of hair in my microphone right now. What'd you get for having a cat? Damn, let me get that off. Ew. So let me give a brief rundown of Sesame Street, for those who do not know. Sesame Street and the Muppets are a Jim Henson Company production that have been ongoing since 1969. It is still ongoing today, making it one of the longest running TV programs of all time. It blends both hand-operated puppets with live human actors. I don't know why it said it that way, but I think I'm going to stick with that, which creates a pseudo-ARG for the viewer. And I'm going to use that term ARG because I think it fits, all right? That's augmented reality game. As most importantly for this video, the Muppets, the characters within the show, exist within real life. That is the most important note to make about Sesame Street. The show places great emphasis on the way that characters interact with the world around them and the way the world impacts the characters within Sesame Street. The Muppets themselves exist in a real tangible place. Sesame Street to the Muppets is a real place within our world. And as the show grew in popularity, so too did its availability for celebrity guest stars. And celebrity guest stars became a staple among Sesame Street, ranging from actors, dancers, Soviet Union defectors, and then even politicians. From sports players like Kareem Abdul to like mega famous celebrities like Jamie Lee Curtis, Samuel Jackson, and then even James Gandolfini from Sopranos came in, and I swear this is Sopranos canon. He's just talking about fear in the most Tony Soprano way possible. All right, I swear to God, this fits right in with Sopranos canon. I've seen the whole show. This could very easily be a cut dream sequence from the show.
How much you weigh?
8 pounds.
Promise. All right. With the fame and success of Sesame Street growing as time went on, they had more opportunity and more resources to do cool real-world tie-ins for all the characters, like the movie Follow That Bird, which is a cross-country epic about race relations, segregation, and slavery, all under the guise of finding Big Bird a home. That sounds a little adult to you. I was shocked when I did more research into Sesame Street and the Muppets. The amount of adult-themed content that they have produced. Follow That Bird, that's up here. That's top of the Muppets iceberg. That's barely the tip, all right? One step down, this show called Dinosaurs, also produced by the Jim Henson Company, utilizing Muppets and real-life tie-ins. Episode 219 and 220 of the show Dinosaur, called Nuts to War, is about the two-legged dinosaurs and the four-legged dinosaurs going to war over pistachios, creating the first war in history. And if you think to yourself at this point, oh, that sounds kid-friendly, they're just fighting over pistachios, some dinosaurs fighting pistachios. The first war in history leads to the death of countless dinosaurs, the chief's son, and somehow culminates in the dinosaur news reporter Howard Hadoopy in reciting the names of real-life communist sympathizers that we found in the government HUAC hearing for suspected communist ties. Why is a dinosaur talking about real-life communist sympathizers? You see what I mean? A fucking dinosaur doxed real-life communist supporters. Remember that. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, all right? This video isn't about how the dinosaurs doxed real-life communist supporters in a television show from the 1970s. I wish it was. That would make my life a lot easier, but it's not. We need to get back to Kermitting 9/11. Before the Muppets creator Jim Henson had created Sesame Street, he started another show called Sam and Friends, which premiered in 1955. Kermit was actually one of the very first Muppets that Jim Henson had ever created and put on television. At this point, Kermit wasn't really a frog. He was just some abstract, horrifying, amphibious mass. Sam and Friends saw moderate success for the 6 years that it ran, from 1955 to 1961. Wasn't the smash hit that Sesame Street would be, but that didn't stop Jim Henson, because in the years of 1961 to 1969, the time between the end of Sam and Friends and the beginning of Sesame Street, Jim Henson went on to produce some fucking horrifying things. Some things I had never believed would have came out of his hands. What is this? Ew! Ew! I don't like it. Who made this? This is something I would show to someone on acid to get them to go away. Why would he make this? Who is this for? In addition to building out these really dark and horrifying things, Jim Henson also made the Jim Henson Studios, which would allow him to actually make Sesame Street in that time period. So I guess there was something productive being done there other than scaring the hoes. In 1969, with the launch of Sesame Street, Kermit was officially declared a frog. I put in the notes, Halo Grunt birthday party sound effect. I hope I remember to put that in. Where he hosted a segment called Sesame Street Newsflash, where Kermit the Frog played the role as a news reporter, interviewing various fairy tale creatures and other Muppets around Sesame Street to get their opinions in certain matters, and occasionally to break out into a little jig, a little song and dance. Kermit had some hitters. He had some banging songs like Being Green. That's a certified classic. Speaking of the music from Sesame Street and the Muppets, you ever see that movie or that one song, Am I a Man or Am I a Muppet? That song hits. Why did they go so hard for that? My friend sent me that song while I was researching this video, and I was flabbergasted, gobsmacked, bizzledorfed, if you will. And with Kermit also being a frog, it led to Jim Henson giving Kermit a pretty decent backstory. He's one of 2,500 siblings. He was born in Leland, Mississippi, which, if I looked at historical records, places it right in the cotton belt of the United States during the Civil War time. And looking at the way his family lived, I don't think his ancestors were on the good side of the whip, if you catch my drift. Although later on the Ellen show, Kermit said he was from Louisiana, but I'll just assume that was a slip of the tongue at the hands of Ellen. Probably just got fucking scared. Not important to the story, but that's additional detail. In 1976, Kermit the Frog became host of The Muppet Show. The Muppet Show is based around the Muppet Theater, where the Muppets and Kermit the Frog would stage various musical and comedy numbers to perform for guests. Now, The Muppet Show was a hit. The Muppet Show was broadcast in over 100 countries, and Times Magazine called it the most popular show on planet Earth. That's unbelievable that they hosted that Kermit the Frog. I didn't know this at all, that the Muppets at one point were the most popular television program on planet Earth. Now, the Muppet Show is where Kermit really began to build his influence, really began to put his roots in, and to start to make connections with people that are really important to this story. And this story being how he caused 9/11. Just to remind you, I'm gonna put a big fat pin, like right here in my imaginary pin board. I'm on a green screen, guys, alright? I'm got a fucking pin board, but I got a giant sheet of green material lying around my house. But like I said, we're going to put a big fat pin right here. I'm going to come back to that. Kermit's connection, the people Kermit met, and how Kermit the Frog could have caused 9/11. Now, that's the whole point of the video, but it's too early. It's too early. You aren't ready. It's too early. You aren't ready. It's too early. So we're going to come back, all right? We're going to come back to this once we have more context. Once you, the audience, will understand what's actually going on. Now, as I said before, The Muppets is an ARG, where the events in the Muppet world impact our world and vice versa. And with The Muppet Show now being the most popular show in the world, we can see how Kermit began to build his influence in the world of politics. All these pictures you see, Kermit the Frog with Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, Hillary Clinton, Miss Piggy in Kermit the Frog in Red Square, Moscow, Russia, during the Cold War, Muppets in Congress. All these pictures are real. These are pictures made by the Jim Henson Company and are canon events within the Muppets lore, all right? I was fully prepared to AI generate some pictures to prove a point or to add some visuals to this. I did not have to. All right? I did not have to make anything up. There is all the evidence right there. Jim Henson and the Jim Henson Company had already made the greatest shitpost content in history. I didn't have to do a damn thing. But like I said, we're putting a pin in this. We're putting a pin in all these important figures you just saw and how they tie back to Kermit causing 9/11. All right? So I don't know if that's two pins. We have the first pin I think there'll be one pin. There'll be one pin. We'll merge the pins together. Kermit and his sphere of influence in politics. One pin. Because before we can get to why these pictures are important, we need to talk about 9/11. And we need to understand the events that happened before 9/11 to cause it to happen. First, we need to talk about someone that isn't talked about enough in regards to 9/11. That person being Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden was the mastermind behind the 2001 September 11th attacks on the United States. He was the leader of the Al-Qaeda terrorist organization. Osama bin Laden was born in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. God, I hope I pronounced that right. In 1957, just 2 years after Kermit the Frog. That's such a funny sentence. So Osama bin Laden was born in 1957, just 2 years after Kermit the Frog, to the aristocratic bin Laden family. His father being a billionaire real estate developer within Saudi Arabia. Because of his family's wealth, Osama bin Laden was able to attend some of the most elite schools within Saudi Arabia, which let him get his degree in business administration, which looking back on it, makes it probably one of the most destructive business administration degrees ever given to a person, because I know damn well he made good use of that degree to run Al-Qaeda. Don't ask how I know. Although running businesses wasn't Osama bin Laden's real interest. You see, Osama bin Laden had a love for black horses, poetry, playing soccer. This is all really documented of what Osama bin Laden loved to do in his school. So it kind of seems like his interests more aligned with a Midwest blonde girl from the United States than an actual terrorist leader. But I guess I'm wrong on that, aren't I? because soon after graduating with his degree in business administration, Osama bin Laden decided to join the workforce, as all college students should. Although the workforce in this case wasn't your typical 9 to 5, it was joining the Mujahideen resistance fighters against Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. You see, at the time Osama bin Laden graduated from college, the Soviet-Afghan War was in full effect. The Soviets, as the name implies, the Soviet-Afghan War was fought between the Soviet Union and the people of Afghanistan between 1979 and 1989. The war started when Soviet-led forces launched an invasion of Afghanistan to support the puppet government they had previously put in place to cement their power within the region. Now again, the whole Soviet-Afghanistan war could be a video all its own, but we need to keep it consistent and keep it relevant to Kermit the Frog causing 9/11. So we're going to dial it back a little bit, and we're just going to look at the role that this war played in shaping Osama bin Laden to cause the 9/11 terror attacks in the future. So with Osama bin Laden now working with Mujahideen resistance fighters against the Soviet Union, we in America saw what the Mujahideen were doing, and the Mujahideen is just a term for any Muslim freedom fighter. During the Afghan-Soviet War, the United States began to funnel money into any group that would help fight the Soviet Union, because at that time it was the height of the Cold War, and anything we could do to prevent communism from spreading, especially to the Middle East where our oil was coming from, which supported our entire economy, we would do. Now, by funneling money into these groups, we didn't really have a pick of the cream of the crop. We chose to put money into any group, no matter how extreme their ideals were, as long as they were fighting the Soviet Union. These operations of giving money to Mujahideen fighters and groups within the Middle East to fight the Soviet Union became collectively known as Operation Cyclone. Operation Cyclone was started by President Jimmy Carter and greatly expanded upon by President Ronald Reagan, his successor. Towards the end of the war, the United States and many of the other allied nations involved in this conflict began to take an extreme anti-extremism stance. Funny sentence. And we're beginning to crack down on many of the groups that we were giving funding to. One of these groups was Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden had become leader of Al-Qaeda by being able to provide funding from his family's great fortune back in Saudi Arabia. And with funding from the United States and weaponry, he became a war hero to the Afghan people. It was reported that he fought tooth and nail against the Soviets and was an amazing tactician and brilliant leader. Osama bin Laden was able to unite people and bring together a force strong enough to combat the Soviet Union. This position of power and respect amongst the Afghanistan people for his role against the Soviet Union and helping to keep their country sovereign and independent allowed him to draw upon the support of the locals to later launch terror attacks against the United States as a show of force against all Western nations. Now, during the Afghan-Soviet War, we worked closely with Osama bin Laden and other Mujahideen fighting groups, but that support quickly ended with the end of the Afghan-Soviet War as the Soviet Union had pulled out of Afghanistan, and our relationship with the Mujahideen fighters and their people began to quickly change with the Gulf War. You see, the Gulf War was triggered by the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1990, just 1 year after the Soviet Union had left Afghanistan. The Gulf War involved a US-led coalition of troops deployed in Saudi Arabia, which is Islam's most holy land, to help fight the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. This deployment was met with significant resentment from the Muslim communities, who considered it a violation of Muslim sovereignty within the region and a symbol of Western aggression against the Middle East. The subsequent use of military force and the resulting civilian casualties greatly fueled this anger. See, some people argue that the Gulf War created a fertile ground for extremist ideologies to spread within the Middle East, who exploited the anti-American rhetoric of the time to bolster their own numbers and to bolster their own support. Another point scholars like to make is that the Gulf War provided a great rallying cry for people like Osama bin Laden to rally hate against West. Hate against West. Hate against the West. Hate against West. Hate against the West. Hate against West. Who used it to consolidate his position as a leader of the jihadist movement. Bin Laden portrayed the Western presence within the Middle East as a direct threat to Islam, inciting calls for jihad against the Western world. And jihad is just a Muslim word for war against non-Muslim. That's the TLDR of all the events that led up to 9/11. We have America funding Islamic extremist groups to fight the Soviet Union during the Cold War, leading to those same extremist groups presenting American and Western involvement within the Middle East as a direct threat to Muslim sovereignty within the region. Follow? America at the time only saw it as supporting Western ideology within the rest of the world, and to help prevent the spread of communism. Somewhat innocuous, if you will. I don't believe anyone at the time thought that funding these groups would eventually lead to a mass casualty terrorist attack within the United States just 20 years later. Actually, just 10 years later. We have already established that in a world where Kermit the Frog never existed, the 9/11 terror attacks never happened. But how? What role could Kermit the Frog have played in actually causing these attacks? In those events that listed up, I didn't hear Kermit mentioned once. Wait, just wait, little guy. We'll get to it. I hear ya. We'll get to it. I know. I'm really bad at writing scripts. Just wait. Let's look at everything I've talked about and link it back to Kermit the Frog. How did Kermit the Frog play into all of these events? So let's look at these events. I'll give you a brief rundown. We'll give you a quick refresher for anyone who wasn't paying attention in the last 5 or 10 minutes. All right. Osama bin Laden, the Soviet Union, the Afghan-Soviet War, the Gulf War. And then right over here, one big picture for Kermit himself. So we had to link all 4 of these pictures back to Kermit. And I was struggling at that for a while doing this research. I was struggling. What's the thread? What's the singular thread that's connecting all of these seemingly isolated events to Kermit the Frog? 2 words. Western ideology. You see, that's the unifying thread. That's the piece that links all these players. Western ideology. It's Western ideology and their hate or love for it. But what is Western ideology? Especially in times of the Cold War, it was belief in neoliberalism or the free market economy. Something we know Kermit the Frog supports through his various business endeavors you see throughout Sesame Street and The Muppet Show. Kermit the Frog has always been the leader of the Muppets for a reason. Business savvy. Most portrayals of Kermit the Frog show him more as a manager than a friend of the Muppet. Now, when looking into Kermit's politics, all you'll see is he's pro-green. He always says he's pro-green, pro-swamp, pro-wetland, you know? That he doesn't really care about politics, except for he doesn't like interracial or interspecies relationships. I always thought that was a weird thing to throw in there. Kermit the Frog just hates interspecies relationships because he doesn't want to marry Miss Piggy. He just wants his little side piece. He doesn't want it to be official. He's ashamed. But despite what Kermit himself says, and the Jim Henson Company for that matter, despite what they say, Kermit is incredibly inclined with politics. Watch this clip from the Colbert Report, where Kermit the Frog both talks about politics while plugging his new movie. If that's not Western ideology, I don't know what is. Really annoys me. I had to go to ComedyCentral.com to get this clip. It's not on YouTube. Always on the grind. Always on it. That's Kermit the Frog. This support of Western ideology from Kermit the Frog and the Muppets was clear even to the Soviets. There were articles in Soviet newspapers directly naming Sesame Street, and by extension Kermit the Frog, as Western imperialism coming through the television screen. And by being such an influential and popular figure himself, this gave Kermit the Frog the opportunity to meet some other influential people within the Western world. People that themselves had inadvertently caused 9/11. Those people being Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan. Told you we'd get back to the photos over here. Again, I cannot stress this enough. These photos are real from the Jim Henson Company themselves. I didn't make these up. There's really a picture of Kermit the Frog on the ranch, all right? He was plugged in. Again, I cannot stress this enough. These photos are real, produced by the Jim Henson Company. These are official, documented photos of Kermit the Frog, with 2 of the men most responsible for getting funding to Osama bin Laden, leading to the terror attacks on the United States of America. So how did Kermit the Frog actually cause 9/11? That's the big question, isn't it? But I think the most plausible answer is that Kermit the Frog caused 9/11 the same way all Americans of the time did, by simply supporting Western ideology. You see, Osama bin Laden gave blame to all Americans for Western involvement within the Middle East. That's why the 9/11 terror attacks were an indiscriminate attack against the United States and its people. And Kermit the Frog, he was no different from the average American of the time, although a bit more influential because of his show, I'm sure. See, as the Muppet Show grew in popularity, so too did the hate from communist nations, who outright banned all Western broadcasts, including the Muppet Show. I think Kermit the Frog, believing in the quality of his program, saw that as an insult, and knew that communism went against his life work. So Kermit the Frog gave his support to President Jimmy Carter and President Ronald Reagan to help combat the Soviet Union. Kermit wanted his show across the world. He wanted to spread the good message. Kermit the Frog, at the end of the day, the Muppet Show, was a show aimed at children. He wanted to help children and wanted to be seen across the world helping children. That was his life's goal, and he really believed and he saw the communists as a threat to that goal. Kermit the Frog made frequent trips to the Soviet Union, acting as an emissary and ambassador, trying to quell the tides and to build a Western influence within the Soviet Union. One interesting note I found in this story is that the very first Western broadcast on Soviet television was The Muppet Show, which aired in the fall of 1989, the same year the Soviet-Afghan War had ended. Kermit had won the war against the Soviets and communism, and took this sweet photo with his side piece outside of Red Square, Moscow. You see, within the world of the Muppets, the conclusion I came to is that Kermit the Frog supported the funding of the Mujahideen resistance fighters against the Soviet Union, all in the name of preserving his show's legacy and spreading his message across the world. You see, it's sad. When I started researching this, I wanted to believe that there was some evil, mischievous reason why Kermit the Frog caused 9/11, and that he's actually a monster in disguise, not just a hand and a puppet. But no, it's not that simple. See, Kermit the Frog caused 9/11 the same way all Americans did, by believing in American politics and policies, and supporting Western ideology. While Kermit cannot be held directly responsible for the attacks themselves, his unintentional involvement in Cold War politics and the complexities of the Middle East served to make the attacks on the United States possible. But I think it's really critical to understand that Kermit the Frog, his intentions were always positive. Jim Henson and company, their intentions were always positive. His promotion of peace and understanding was genuine. However, I don't believe Kermit or the Jim Henson Company really understood the intricate interplay between his influence, global politics, and the Middle East, which created a situation where, however indirect, allowed the 9/11 terror attacks to happen. I think Kermit the Frog's story of causing 9/11 serves as a reminder how seemingly insignificant individuals and people can get wrapped up in global history. And I think that it shows, even with the best of intentions, there can be some really crazy unintended consequences. Don't blame Kermit the Frog for 9/11. We're all to blame for 9/11. Thank you for watching. Also, side note, P.S. I know that Osama bin Laden had Tom and Jerry and anime porn and Street Fighter porn on his hard drive. I am linking his hard drive in the description of this video. Could you please, someone, go into his hard drive and find any picture of Kermit the Frog? I searched for a picture of Kermit the Frog on his hard drive for about 2 hours before I gave up. I will give someone $50 if they actually find a picture of Kermit the Frog or any Sesame Street character for that matter. Thank you.